Okay, great. So, hello everyone. Welcome to Sahitya Academy's Webline Literature Series. Today's program is in English language. Today we are going to discuss current trends in Indian poetry. So for the institution, we have been organizing series of programs on. Echo is coming. Okay, yeah, now it's clear. Those people who have been associated closely, who've been watching closely the scenario from last couple of decades, and especially somebody like Sudeep Sen. He edited a wonderful. Those viewers who are watching live, I would recommend Sudeep Sen's anthology he edited for Sahitya Academy of Indian poets. Yeah, it's amazing. It got amazing range of collection of young poets. Okay, that is one aspect. Yeah, thanks, Sudeep. That is one aspect. One aspect of the more and more youngsters, especially in both the urban as well as rural spaces, they're coming forward to take up poetry in English. But the recent, maybe last 5 years or 6 years, we are getting to see more and more varied ways of producing poetry. Now we have Instagram poetry. Earlier it was looked down upon. People who, there were stories, wonderful stories of how a lady, she wrote, she was wrongly confined in Canberra in Australia. For those 3 months, she used her WhatsApp to send it to their friends, and it came out as a poetry book. There's somebody in Canada who's using WhatsApp. So this different digital platform has given rise to various newer ways of producing poetry or disseminating their own thoughts. So we have a wonderful panel of distinguished scholars. Our first speaker is Ms. Sudeep Sen, who needs no introduction, still as a formality. I will just say that Sudeep Sen's prize-winning books include Postmark India, New and Selected Poems, Rain Area, Fractals, New and Selected Poems, translations 1980 to 2015, and London Magazine editions, Eurotext Vintage, Penguin Random House, and Kaifi Azmi, Poems, Azams. Bloomsbury published this. He has edited influential anthologies, including HarperCollins Book of English Poetry, World English Poetry, Modern English Poetry by Younger Indians. Again, this is what Sudeep was displaying earlier. I mean, we can go on. And essentially, he's one of the very few fresh voices, I mean, last decade or so. And he's bringing, is a major contribution is, apart from his literary, his contributions through his writings and editings, is that his uncanny ability to spot talent, unearth them, and bring them to the fore. That's a welcome to the show, Sudeep.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And our next speaker is Mala Swamy Jacob. And Mala Swamy Jacob is a bilingual poet, writer. She's been translating too from Mizo and English to Mizo. She has published 9 books in different genres, 2 volumes of poetry, short story, children's fiction, narrative non-fiction, novel. She has also contributed poems, stories, and articles to various journals and magazines. Earlier, she had lived and worked in different cities in India, taught English to undergraduates in Bangalore and Aizawl, and she was a senior coordinator with Sound and Pictures Archives, Paro in Mumbai. I think that's with Mumbai, and freelance with newspapers such as Statesman, the Assam Tribune, and so on. She is joining us from New Zealand. So it's great to have you with us, Mala Swamy.
Thank you.
Yeah, and our next is KV Dominic. KV Dominic, he joins us from Kerala, and he's an English poet, critic, editor, short story writer, and he's a retired professor of research from the research department in English, Newman College. And he has authored more than 40 books, including 6 books of poems in English and 5 in translations in different languages. He is secretary of Guild of Indian English Writers, Editors and Critics, and editor of 2 international referred biannual journals, IJML and WEC. Well, it's wonderful to see you and great to have you with us, Dominic. Yeah, it's great. And The next speaker will be Gopal Lucky. He's a bilingual poet, critic, editor, writer, and translator. He's author of 22 books, published including 14 volumes of poems in English and 8 volumes of poems and prose in Bengali. His poems, translations, and book reviews have been published across various journals worldwide. He has recently edited a book called Jallianwala Bagh, Poetic Tributes. He has attended various poetry festivals all over the world. So, welcome to the show, Gopal Lucky. Yeah, and our yeah, I mean, not the least, not maybe the last, but he is one of our collaborators for today's program, Dr. Jaydeep Sarangi. Jaydeep Sarangi is a widely anthologized bilingual poet with 8 collections in English, latest being Heart Raining the Light. He is on the editorial boards of many important journals and magazines for poetry. Sarangi is known as a bard on the banks of Jhelum. He is a principal, New Alipur College, Kolkata. Well, thank you very much, Jaydeep, for
Thank you
joining.
so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
So we'll start with Sudeep. You can start your presentations, and as I mentioned, that it's how wonderful it is to see somebody who can bring on fresh voices. So you have a kind of a very unique perspective among the speakers today, from all India perspective for also for us English poetry. So please start now.
So good afternoon, namaskar, sat sri akal, namaskar. I can hear Sangjukta laughing because I missed out the Bangla.
It's so unfortunate that you all can't see me, and I wore quite a nice dress.
Okay,
No.
it's clearly our loss. Clearly,
No, Sudeep, the most influential people in the world are always invisible.
That's right. She's hiding in the wings, controlling all the purse strings.
Yeah.
No, it's a wonderful, it's lovely to see so many friends, colleagues, lovely to see someone all the way from New Zealand joining us. I really like your work. I have most of your books in my library, as I do with all your people. In fact, I was going to make a joke when Mr. Ramon was introducing all of us. Between all of us, the amount of books we have published can sink a ship of poetry. Not a very good thought to start with.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
So Indian poetry, I'll concentrate on the Indian poetry in English because I think other people can take on other strands because that's an area I've worked on, and I'll be fairly informal. As we know that we have had 3 or 4 distinct phases in Indian poetry. One is the sort of pre-modern. In fact, as we speak, we are celebrating 200 years of English poetry in India by Indians this year and next year. And in my HarperCollins book, the HarperCollins Book of English Poetry, which came out in 2012, which had about 70 odd poets born after 1950. And then the anthology I just showed you, the Sahitya Academy one, between these two, if you take it as volume 1 and volume 2, it pretty much maps the best of English language poetry for the last 70 years. It has about 150 poets in the 2 books concerned. One of the ways I provocatively, in fact, said in my introduction in the HarperCollins book that the best of English language poetry that is being published is far, far superior than the average fiction that is being churned out. And this provocative statement has borne to be true. We've seen that with the culmination of the Sahitya Academy anthology and many other anthologies which you all have also put out. These are just mine. So there were 3 or 4 phases. One is the pre-modern. So when you can take people like E.V. Ryu's anthology way back in 1820, the first generation of poets such as Michael Madhusudan Dutt and Sarojini Naidu, that lot. Then came the imitative or the first phase of pioneering English poets with Honalgiri and Nissim Ezekiel and so on. Even the early stages of their poetry was, I think, and they can kill me if they want to, but I've never stopped shy of speaking my truths. I thought many of their early work was very imitative, imitating English poetry, had a kind of Victorian diction, certainly Naidu and so on did. And historically, of course, we know why. As their poetry sort of matured, they assumed a kind of modernism which was inflected by Indianisms.
Yeah.
But it was still a strange kind of khichdi, because take an iconic poem by Ezekiel, Goodbye Party to Miss Pushpa T.S., or Gieve Patel's On Killing a Tree, or Ramanujam's early poems.
Yeah.
Somehow Indianisms were forced. I feel forced when you look at English poetry broadly, forced into the English language to make it Indian. Then came sort of my generation, where I feel English was no longer a language of the colonizers. I have three mother tongues, Bangla, Hindi, and English. Depending on who I sit with, I speak and write in that. Urdu, I understand very clearly, even though I read it in Devanagari script. And the generation which is in the Sahitya Academy book is again an interesting generation. They are the younger generation, I suspect half a generation younger than me and many of us on the panel.
Yeah.
They use English very, very confidently. But I'm not sure about their grasp of grammar. Now, because they speak English instinctively and have picked up English in school and the media and so on, when they speak, I find they speak very confidently. But when I actually start reading their work, apart from the best ones, they're still riddled with grammatical errors. And it's a no-no for English poetry. I mean, you know, frankly, good English poetry, whether it's written by a New Zealander, by an Indian, by a South African, by an English person or American, is good English poetry. It has the same rules, the same grammar, the same set of syntax. So many poets who try and defend that, say that, you know, this is Indianism or this kind of local vernacular speech, I don't really buy it, because the poem, in fact, on the page doesn't, you know, hold ground. And that is why many of these poems don't succeed beyond a very small sort of patting each other's back group. But if we take the entire swathe of the kind of writing that is being produced by all these generations, especially the younger ones and the current ones, and some of our senior poets who are still alive, such as Mahapatra and Keki Daruwala, and many of them, Adil Jasawala. Adil Jasawala, of course, you know, he's producing some of his best works in the last 10 years. He's been so prolific, in fact. So if we take the best of all of us, then I think the status of English language poetry in India is not only fabulous, but it is on a really, really fantastic standing worldwide. And of course, I'm a biased big flag bearer for Indian poetry. You know, it's almost like, you know, having a membership to the Communist Party card, which also I have, or my father did. So it's very important to sort of protect each other, because English language fiction gets a lot of play in the media by virtue of the genre. But poetry needs sustenance, it needs a community, it needs all of us to read each other's work, and people do it, and all the positives I've sort of laid out. But there's also a very, very negative side, which, because it's a symposium and because it's all of us speaking seriously, it needs to be addressed, because all of us as teachers and anthologizers and editors need to keep this in mind and have to be careful. There's a lot of toxicity and negativity in the world of poetry, which needs to be addressed. How it can be addressed, you know, everyone takes their own sort of stance. But it's much like what's happening in America, fake news. And there's no fact checking. And that leads to a lot of corrosion in a lot of good writing. And of course, scams, various scams. And that is something that, you know, has gone on for ages. There were camps even before and after. But I felt when I was younger, the senior poets were really like mentors. I mean, people like Dom Moraes, Janto Mahapatra, Nissim Ezekiel, any of the people I've interacted with and become friends with had a wonderful benign side of their personality, which was very, very attractive. It's a sort of benignness and generosity of spirit that I, as a Bengali, grew up in a Bengali family, which I was familiar with. But when I step out of that, the current generation does not necessarily have that. And we need to, as collectively, need to do something about it. But as far as the quality of poetry is concerned, it's fantastic because people are experimenting with new forms, making new forms, bringing in Indianism in a way that is very different from what the earlier generations were doing. It's almost part of their language. Just to give you a small example, and I may read that poem later, I wrote a poem about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, called Bharatanatyam Dancer. It's a it's set in Kalakshetra in Chennai, Rukmani Arundel's school where I was for a month. In fact, my obsession with classical Indian dance goes back over 35 years. So my next book is called The Whispering Anklet, which is entirely on classical Indian dance. So Bharatanatyam Dancer, after many drafts, I realized what I was hearing in my ear was the bol and tal of the rag itself. And it was tadhin ta tai tai ta, tadhin ta tai tai ta, tadhin ta tai tai ta. So I just told myself, wouldn't it be interesting if, as an English language practicing poet, I invent a new form, ABACCA, 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 something that has not been done in the English language. So when you see the poem on the page, that's the rhyme scheme it follows. And not just that, I sort of stood on top of the stage watching the dancer dance and photographed her footsteps on the stage. Normally we see a performance from head on. So you have the height of the stage and the width of the stage as the rectangular axes. And we imagine the depth, which is the Z axis. Mm-hmm. But when you go on top and have the bird's eye view, you get a completely different version of the dance. Similarly, I bring this up because similarly, if we are able to do this with poetry, we'll be able to get into kind of spaces which are not explored before. A lot of the poets are just exploring English language poetry from one face, two-dimensionally, not even three-dimensionally, forget the fourth dimension. And by that, I mean structurally. The fourth dimension, philosophically, of course, people are talking about spirituality and so on. That's a different sort of thing altogether. But the language, attention to language is what I'm really concerned about. And when I did all my anthologies, one of the ways I do it, apart from the poets I admire, who I write to ask for work, when the work comes in for the anthology, my assistant basically takes down the name of the title of the poems and assigns a number to each contributor. So when I actually choose the people, I have no idea who I'm reading. Because for me, the poems are more important than the personality. I want the poems to win, the best poems to get into the anthology. That's the only way we can actually raise the standard of Indian poetry. Whether or not we like them as a person or not, poetry just ought to win. And that's my way of doing it. It makes, you have to take the good and the bad. Sometimes some of my very good friends don't make it in the anthology, but if they are mature enough, I would hope the friendship still continues. Sometimes some of my enemies have got into the anthology and they're surprised. Surprisingly, they don't tend to move out of the anthology because there we go. Okay. But I think the health of Indian poetry in English is in a fabulous space. You have some good representations here who are also flag bearers. Yeah. So it's a real treat. And these are my opening words. And I leave it at that, and then we can come back to all this.
Yeah. So that's thanks. Thank you very much. Sudeep, you are saying that the Indian poetry currently is very vibrant. Health is fantastic. And however, there is a element of toxicity. That
there is coronavirus which needs to be addressed.
You are saying that we need to have another dimension of perspective. Thank you very much. So Mala Swamy.
Yeah, thank you, Sahitya Academy, for making me part of the of this symposium. I feel very much honored. And as a native of Northeast India, I'd like to speak on the poetry of the region. As we all know, the region has 8 states inhabited by peoples of diverse cultures and languages. English
Mala Swamy, excuse me, can you speak a little louder? Your voice is very low.
Okay. Is that better?
Yeah.
English is an important linked language among the people groups. So English writing is quite robust there, especially from Assam, Meghalaya, Nagaland. Some translations from vernacular languages into English have been done as well. And Manipuri and Assamese are probably the lead in the translations. Poetry seems to be the preferred medium among the English writers. I say this because it's quite easy, something like Sudeep had mentioned also, it's quite easy to collect enough poems for an anthology, whereas uh, collecting prose writings is a little bit difficult. And the works of the poets are very different from one another, yet there seems to be a common thread that runs through many of them. Some of these are a feeling of cultural alienation from the so-called mainland India, and to an indefinable sense of longing, and three, much social and political angst, and also exploration of local myths and legends. So, in the poem of called Man and Brother, Mamang Dai from Arunachal Pradesh has beautifully dealt with the local myth that man and tiger were born as brothers. I quote, "The tiger runs swiftly from my father's house, calling my name. Brother, man, brother, have mercy for our destiny. The long dream strikes from the past. Too late, I answer." In a poem called The Construct, Tashi Chofel of Sikkim narrates an incident when the people were provoked to fight against the gods. I quote again, crashing through the undergrowth. Am I audible?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Crashing through the undergrowth on the heels of a prey, the young hunter comes into the clearing. A parched throat, he looks to the stream, only to chance upon a clandestine encounter of the village beauty in the arms of another. Who else? God. Angered by this incident, the village young men marched out to battle, but the gods defeated them with a clever trick. So these are some of the examples of how
Yeah.
these are being explored. And I also have written on Mizo myths and legends. In one poem, I've reinterpreted the legend of Pihmuaki, who was the first Mizo song composer known by name. It is said that she made so many songs that the villagers got worried that the coming generations will have nothing more to compose. So she was buried alive along with her gong, a musical instrument. But I find this explanation for such a cruel punishment hard to believe. So I choose to imagine that she was given the punishment for offending her society by criticizing their lifestyle. So I'll just read the poem, which is, yeah, like I said, it's my interpretation of the legend. Pimwaki. They couldn't stand your prophetic voice that spoke against their misdeeds. As night after night you sang your songs in your lonely hut. Your gong music enchanted them, melody drove them wild, but the lyrics did the mischief. The lyrics pierced their hearts. The heroes loved the exploits, heads and loots won in raids. Killing was the way to live to attain the honored place in Piaral. You derided their philosophy, wouldn't sing their eulogy after a successful raid. Tried to stop them dating Lassie, told them to choose Tlang Sam over Kang Tai. Their annoyance grew day by day, decided to silence you altogether, shut you out from golden sunlight, wind and call of Jukturikur. Your gong still rings under the earth, bong, bong, a disturbance in tyrants' ears. So these are some examples. Then another theme found in several poems from the Northeast is concern for the environment. Easterine Kyrie expresses it gently but poignantly in her poem uh, called For Justine Pierre. I quote, someday you will ask why the birds no longer sing and the flowers smell as sweet as I said they used to do. Why the rivers no longer have fish and the trees green leaves, and wonder where all the rainbows went. One day, my son, when you come to ask me what color was the sky before it turned gray, I will no longer have the answers. And also, another poet, Kinpam Singh Nongkinri, also portrays how the environment degradation is going on because of the greed of man. So I'll quote a few lines from him again. The earth is torn and raw with ragged wounds. The hills are bleeding black. The towns are tall and proud with coal structures. The earth is torn again and again, disemboweled everywhere. Its black viscera spills in streams, its carcass scraped hollow. Someday, wouldn't the hills collapse upon themselves? So those are again examples. And as stated before, many of the Northeast poems express angst, which are personal, some social, some political. So I'd like to read one poem from Lal Nunes Sanga, Ralte, where he describes the struggles of a child abandoned by the father and brought up by the mother as a single parent. So I'll just read this from Eastern News, a poem called Obstinate. If it wasn't for the Indian government, I swear I won't even remember my father's name. They're obsessed and keep asking for it for every important document of my life. Nowadays, I have to write late as part of his name, and often I'd hear a polite cough or an I'm sorry. And I think if you should feel sorry, then feel sorry for that second name there under optional mother's name. Superfluous, apologetic. Years of sweat and worry and weary and alone. I've seen her smile as long as my eyes were open. My ears heard her sob when they closed. Her feet disfigured from running so that my stomach never knew hunger and that my lessons never ceased so that I'd be better. Yet, at each rung that I climb, they ask for my father's name. I've seen him only twice. Once, when I was still too young, my memory confused his face with a picture of someone else on the wall. Then, years later, when he was ill and dying, he wasn't even awake to know I was there. Yet, it's his name they ask for. My dear government, know that this has been my curse. It is always with heartbreaking guilt that I put his name before hers. So that's another case of young people's writing. And we'll also talk about the political turmoil and its effects. It's another very common theme with all the, all the insurgency and political unrest going on. So this time I'll just read a couple of my own poems again. One called These Hills. Up here on these hills, time moves at snail's pace on winding roads. Wind passing through scented pines conducts needle orchestra. Cuckoo's call beyond joins a symphony. Come night, Doors shut to bar, shots that shatter silence now and then, straining green hills red. Once on these lovely hills, your soul roamed free, gathering mushrooms, picking pine cones till misty dusk. Then by fireside you read of hope and dreamt sweet dreams of a better tomorrow. But the day failed to arrive. Twilight lingered, hearts turned cold, smiles turned sour. Time plods on. Freedom is lost in the searching on these violated hills. And I'll just read another one on the effects of the violence, how it affects the people. The songsters.
Yeah.
Yes.
No. Your voice been broke in between. Yeah.
Okay. The songsters lament. On Blue Mountain, the songster sits, guitar strings all broken. The song becomes a tuneless chant. When guns sounded in our land, bombs shouted, fire screamed, cicadas stopped singing. Homes went up in flame, hearts were raised, the sacred profaned, music, dreams to nightmare, wild wolves prowled, fear stalked every street, songs curdled, frozen by night. I'm waiting, waiting. Will the great bear turn around over our bamboo hills? So I'm not too sure about my timing. Am I keeping to the time so far?
No, you have 2 minutes left. 2 minutes more. You have a couple of minutes more.
Okay. So maybe I'll, in some of my poems, I've tried to sort of point out the source of all this violence and evil. So maybe I'll just read another. Yeah, the time seems to be running out.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just read Rainbow Hatters. Oh, okay. Let's have a little bit of hope. Here and there, this has a couple of minutes now. Here and there, which has quite a bit of allusions. One of them to Ian Foster's and also T.S. Eliot. Here and there, I think you'll recognize it. Here and there. Woolmoher flames red overhead under blue blaze of sky. Fierce orange sun scorches brown earth to cracks. On some cool shore far away, white waves lap silver sands. The streets are loud with traffic noise, cacophony of blaring sounds, muting music, silencing songs, the koel's melody muffled. In some woodlands far away, songbirds warble on green trees. Mr. Raju, middle-aged, with a respectable paunch, sits a snorting in his car, stuck fast in a jam. Oh, that old guy in the hill, churning out tale after tale to the delight of all. Young man Martin on a bike, helmet in hand, wearing a workday morning face, weaves in and out of vehicles. He's fashionably grumpy, gently, gently let him pass. Madame Rita's running for the bus. Oh, it leaves before she reaches. Poor, hassled, frazzled woman. Beside the cratered roads on garbage heaps, crowds, cows and street dogs feed. In a faraway land, cattle gaze in meadows. Mr. X in office, normal every way, looks after himself and his own. He's moderately honest but doesn't mind a side income when it comes his way. Some, darker by 1,000 shades, hold their lives to ransom, Oh, my people, the mighty poet sitting in the bank sees far and wide with eagle's eyes myriad appalling images of highways and byways, has seen them all, foresuffered all. My eyes are growing dim, memories are fading, yet I remember violet hyacinth blooming in a pond, and I remember wind blowing through pine trees. In the bay, the dolphins play, somersaulting in the air over green water. Seagulls wait on the shore for our coming home. So with that, I'll end my
Yeah.
presentation of the Northeast.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you. Swamy, there are a couple of questions, one put by Sudeep Sen, and we'll come to that later. In the meanwhile, you can see the Sudeep Sen comment in the comments. Okay. Now, with you say that poetry is robust in northeastern states, and of course, because English is a vital link language, and you mentioned some themes. Okay, there are dominant themes in the English poetry. So with that, we will go to Dominic. He joins us from Kerala. Mr. Dominic, please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself.
Is it audible, sir?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Very happy good afternoon to all of you. Let me first of all express my deep gratitude to the esteemed Secretary of Sahitya Academy, Dr. K. Srinivasa Rao, for inviting me as a participant. As our country and the world as such has been paralyzed by the COVID-19 pandemic and the resultant lockdown since last March, writers across the world have been forcibly shifted from their paradigm thoughts and concepts. As a result, we come across a new trend in the present literature. One of the tiniest entities, coronavirus, is creating history in the world, dividing the world into two, before COVID-19 or BC and after COVID-19 or AC. When will the AC start? The Almighty knows. As literature is the study of people, their way of life, culture, tradition, nature, and environment, etc., the literature produced during this COVID-19 period will surely reflect the tragedies, miseries, and other problems caused by the pandemic. Poets in our country have been sharing their emotions, apprehensions, sorrows, dejection, contentment, etc., related to the pandemic through social media and print media. Man is the only creature who is running after luxuries. All other beings hunt for or are satisfied with the food required for their survival, whereas man is not satisfied with just necessities, but he is crazy after comforts and luxuries, and he will try to get it at any cost. He is so selfish that he is not bothered or concerned about his fellow beings, and least considerate to non-human beings. There is no need for human beings to disturb the wild and hunt the animals there. Deadly viruses, which are inactive and harmless to wild animals, are driven back from their habitats to human bodies, and they react like a sleeping lion when a stick is thrust to its mouth. When majority of the people in the world is not having sufficient food for survival, the minority wastes tons of food after their use. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations estimates that as many as 25,000 people lose their lives every day as a result of hunger. That adds up to roughly 9.1 million people who die of starvation each year. Poor people are easy prey of all pandemics. Half of the world population, more than 3 billion people, live in poverty. Industrial, agricultural laborers, fishermen, poor farmers, traders, taxi drivers, etc. are the worst affected by the COVID-19 lockdown. Millions of diasporas work all over the world. Many had lost their lives due to coronavirus. Not even shown to the dearest ones, they were buried in alien lands. Majority have lost their jobs. They all wanted to come back to their native lands. Lockdown has cancelled their flights. Losing their jobs, their future is now bleak. Though COVID-19 has stumbled the world and is devastating human lives like a tsunami, it has bestowed upon nature a marvelous reparation and rendered to mankind some benefits and habits. Man is doing now reparations on nature. He has started playing concordant notes, began flowing with the eternal flow. The lockdown all over the world has purified the air man has defiled and water he has polluted. Let me quote a few lines from my poem entitled Coronavirus, the Mightiest Wizard of All Times. Man, look at nature around you. How happy are animals now? How merry are birds? How gleeful are fishes? How gaily dance plants and trees? You wake up with chirps and tweets of variety of birds in morning. Flies and flowers greet you with smiles. Coronavirus regained the rights of all animals. Animals now travel anywhere they like. Roads and streets you make to their habitats, they use for rest and playgrounds of cubs and calves. Latest poems I have composed on COVID-19. They are in the form of haiku, strictly following the syllabic pattern of 5-7-5 syllables. The title of the poem is Haiku on COVID-19. Many of these haiku are in the form of dialogues between God and man and coronavirus, nature and man, animals and man, etc. Let me read. Congregation says, God, save us from the pandemic. God, I am helpless. Man, aren't we your dearest? God, it's your ego tells you so. All my creations, darling to me. Man complains to God. Are we fated to live with mask? God, enough you polluted air. Dawn now echoes birds' chirps. Thank you, thank you, thank you, God, for restoring our rights. Coronavirus to man. A lesson for your conceit. Be humble and kind. Man to coronavirus. What harm have we done to you? Virus, you called us? Earth to human beings. Except you all are happy now. Reward for your crimes. God to human beings. Mask you wear is punishment for masking in your lives. Little boy to mom. You punished for using cell phone. Now force for online classes. Earth to human beings. You wash your hands for survival. Crime's blood still remains. Infants wail to guilty adults. Pandemic is your product. We are drowned in it. Animals want humans. Exploit more, you perish more. Creator protects us. Mother Earth to quarry man. How ruthless you dynamite mother's breast that fed you. River to her mother sea. Man raped and stabbed head to foot. Through his waist only. Plight of human being. Social being now antisocial. Result of his karma. Members of same group bound to keep distance each other. Reward of leagued crimes. Animals to humans. You are caged and we are free. Tit for tat, mind you. Another remarkable attempt I have done during this pandemic period is a poetic cultural exchange for the special issue of the International Referee Journal. Text, Journal of Writing and Writing Courses, edited by Professor. Anything?
Yeah, so I mean, you can also tell something about, tell all of us and the people who are watching this live about the current literary trends, maybe in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, or Karnataka. How is English poetry? Is it thriving?
Yeah, I am telling about the Kerala topography, Kerala climate, etc. I am speaking through poetry, sir. It is coming. I am coming to the regional aspect.
Okay, okay. You have 6 minutes left, sir.
Yeah, I am coming to that.
Yeah.
So I was telling about this indoor cultural program. The focus of this special issue is Indian-Australian exchanges, collaborative poetic inquiries into culture and places. Poets in Australia are paired with the poets in India. As part of the poetic exchange, I sent 3 poems to which Dr. Amelia Walker responded with her 3 poems. The poems we exchanged comprise a mixture of nature poems and environmental poems. As I belong to the state of Kerala, my poems were on the landscape of Kerala itself. Kerala, as you are aware, is called God's own country because of the beautiful landscapes and equable moderate climate. I would like to present before you one of the poems. Can I read the poem, sir?
Yeah.
I would like to present before you one of the poems I have sent. It is on Vagamon, one of the most attractive hill stations in Kerala. The never-ending line of lush green hills with tea plantations, murmuring pine forests, attractive meadows, breathtaking ravines, and meandering rivulets enchant the visitors. Let me read the poem. Vagamon, Kerala's beautiful bonnet. A spectrum of spectacular scenes carved all around. Steep street runs like an anaconda. Sky-high precipice on the right side. Held-down caves on the other side. Miles-long canvas, black and high. Green patches here and there. God with his brush. A series of cataracts, thin, thick, tall, short, some like white paint oozed from his brush, God's brush. Others like curtains, slowly falling. Eternal curtains, eternal falling, reminding us the curtain of life. Mounds after mounds, green spongy eggs placed in his large tray. Dawn to dusk, kissed by the sun. The moon and the stars embrace at night. Descending clouds cleanse the dirt treaded by humans. Lying helpless, people speak to him, God. Pray to him to ease their minds. None will doubt here the therapeutic power of nature. Pine valleys of Wagaman, an exotic wild beauty. Tall and thick pine trees support firmament from falling. God has spread a fantastic carpet knitted by dry pine leaves, lying relaxed. People draft requests and angels descend through the pine trees and take these requests to his office, God's office. The sun is always gentle, seems an evening. Nocturnal music of crickets, resounding hymns of angels and semi-darkness lift our minds to an eternal abode of repose. Now, about Kerala, I am telling about how the climate is now changing. The climate of Kerala is changing now.
Sir, you have 2 minutes left.
Oh, okay, sir.
2 minutes, sir. You have 2 minutes left.
Okay. So the climate is changing now as part of the global warming. Summer becomes intolerable and monsoon season is a cause of worry. Too often floods and landslides. As we are aware, man is responsible for all these climatic changes. Let me read a poem related to the change in nature of man, change in nature and man in Kerala. The title of the poem is, Where Shall I Flee from This Fretful Land? Once God's own country with equable climate, rainy season for 6 months, and mild summer for the rest of the year. Blessed with brooks, rivers, lakes, and greeneries. Now people crazy for material pleasures and luxuries tumbled nature's balance and bounties, resulting scanty rain and intolerable heat. So where shall I flee from this fretful land? Once fertile land for free and secular thoughts, people lived in multicultural harmony. Hindus, Muslims, Christians lived as brothers and sisters, respected each other and their religious views. Now hell of intolerance and religious fundamentalism. So where shall I flee from this fretful land? Once politicians were apostles, their selfless service to the nation lauded gratefully by the people. Now people look at majority with dubious eyes, for corruption is stamped on their brow. National income created of sweated labor, looted by these ignoble parasites. So where shall I flee from this fretful land? With this, I wind up my paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Gopal Lucky, you can start your views on the current poetry trends.
Thank you. First of all, I must thank Sahitya Academy for inviting me in this symposium. I am basically a bilingual poet. I started my career in writing in Bengali because I was born in Calcutta. I was there for my initial 30 years of childhood. And then I passed my college. And then due to my job assignment, I have been outside Calcutta for the next 30 years. So my writing part is divided. Initially started writing in Bengali, which I used to write much more in my early life. And then when I was out of Calcutta, so I started writing in English. Although I used to write in English earlier, but at the later stages, I started only in English. So now again, I am back to Calcutta, and again, I am feeling this relation between this Bengali poetry and English poetry. First of all, I agree with Sudeep that the trend which we have observed, basically we start with English poem, that trend we have observed in 19th century and the 20th century and now the 21st, is that if you draw a curve, I mean, if you say draw a trending curve, you can see that there is a peak and trough. There will be a peak, like in 19th century, there is a romanticism, mysticism, like that. And when you come down to this 20th century is very much, I mean, affected by two world wars were there. So it has naturally changes the writing pattern of the poets and even writers also. And they are coming down to more realistic. Realism is the, and more connected to the society, because there's a lot of day-to-day problem which they are facing. So there is a complete change of this writing of poets and writers. So there is, if you can call it as a pick there, it is due to the poets' poems and writing related to the society, to the pain and wounds of individuals, and so on and so forth. But in 21st century, again, there is a invasion of, you can say, electronic media and the social media. So we are on global connection, and so we are connected more with the global poets and writers, and there is a lot of influence on this globally when we interact with poets and writers all over the world. There is a very decent interaction. Yes.
Very lighter vein. Somebody mentioned yesterday there is a lot of borrowed empathy because of social media. It's not a natural empathy, borrowed empathy. So we are all saying, as you are mentioning, globally painful we are.
Yeah, please. Yeah. And and the next thing is which I am emphasizing, which I agree with Sudeep, that there is lack of mentorship even in Bengali poetry and as well as in English poetry. In our time, when I started writing poetry, I used to go to a lot of good poets there, and especially I have very close interaction with Dr. Alokranjan Dasgupta. He was, I mean, an exponent of not only Bengali poetry and in German poetry also. And he used to encourage us to learn language and to write not only in Bengali, in some other language, also in English or in any other language which you are comfortable with. So those type of mentoring which we are missing right now. And even though in English, many Bombay, because I was in Bombay last few years back, so many Bombay poets also told me that in the 50s and 60s, when Nissim Ezekiel used to edit a journal, pen journal, and there they say that only 4 issues and only 20 poems used to they publish. And so there's a huge struggle for the poets to give their poem and to be selected and accepted. So there was a lot of struggle and a lot of, I mean, refining of poems, because once you are a poet, poems is not accepted, you are bound to try to improve that and do whatever way so that your poem will be published. So there is a lot of effort, internal effort is there, and that happens to Bengali poetry also at that point of time. But after that, what happened when this, and another point is there, that during in our time and before that, we have that lot of poetry movement, I mean, through journals. I mean, in Bengal, you must be knowing that there are Kallol, there is a journal, and where Premen Mitru is a very powerful poet, so there are Chintakumar Sen Gupta, and then they moved to Kobita, that is edited by Buddhadev Bose, and Parichaya, that is Vishnu Dev was there. So all those stalwarts were there, and they started some poetry movement, and almost it's like a community poetry. So there are a lot of community of poets. So that actually helps a lot of poets to come up, to groom. But in recent times, this has not been happening even in Bengal also. But one point I just mentioned that besides the social media, that there is, especially in Kolkata with Samyukta here, she knows that we have been in a IPPL, which is called Intercultural Poetry and Performance and Poetry Library. these actually help. This is some sort of a community, you can say, that poets are there. It's only there's a discussion, the book launch, and everything into poetry, and that not doesn't pertain to only to Bengali, even English. It's get Bengali poets are also coming there reading. There's a lot of discussion. So these type of things are coming back. So I mean, this IPPL forum, we must thank this who has invented this idea, but Dr. Bashavi Feza. She is based in Scotland, and also Shangyukta Di from Kolkata. So there is a lot of activity, and these actually help these modern poets and the younger poets, especially in Kolkata. So and recently they have already have their branches, IPPL in Mumbai, in Delhi also. So you can call it some sort of a movement there. So this is a very good thing. And moreover, in Bengali poetry in Calcutta also, there is a few journals are still there, like Kavi Sharma and Bhashanagar. They are there, where there are a lot of poets are there, and they are also only discussing only about poet and poetry. So these trend, if it continues over the years, because nowadays everybody is confined to the online. I mean, electronic media and social media, they are very powerful. And moreover, the printing part is it's on the wane. I mean, printing journals are not much coming out, and people are mostly dependent on online journals and social media writing. And you have already mentioned that there is a Twitter poetry. So what I feel that in social media, there is a lot of issues are there. There could be some good points are also there, that you have that connection with your readers or your audience, whichever we can think. But the problem is that social media is basically, it's a very close knit. Everybody has their own group of people, their friends. So anybody who wants to write anything, he just dumped into the social media, and then there is a lot of likes, and people are very much overjoyed that, oh, my poem is accepted and everybody likes it, so I must be a very good poet, especially for the younger ones. So that not only in English, I think in other language, also in Bengali also the same thing is happening. So this is a negative trend, and we have to accept that there are certain good things, but there are certain bad things. Good thing in the sense that you have that connection, and you can always, you write somewhere and you can give that connectivity to, or the link to the social media, so that others can read. Two, you have written to a certain online journal, and that has been peer reviewed. So that has certain standard, and if people read it and say, oh, his poem is accepted, so there will be a lot of motivation for the other people also, other poets also, that they can write there also. So that is a positive thing in one way. And regarding and another trend is now coming, especially for these modern poets and the younger poets, that there is a performance poetry, which was there earlier. But there, you must have heard that Philip Larkin, the poem, who used to have a lot of criticize those things. He said that it's performance poetry it's out of a fashion. It's only very easy text, easy syntax, and easy rhythm, so that you can reach to your audience or the readers very quickly. So those poets or poems are not very much in the depth is not much. So that is one version, but actually in the modern day, it has this performance poetry has to come out of ages. So that has a lot of advantage, and people are inclined, not only in India, in other places also, there are poets who are in the performance poetry, and so that they can connect, because poetry, there is a very limited number of readers or audience. So they want to connect with the more people, more younger people, more other than non-poets who can be attracted to them. So that is also another good thing which I found, even though this performance poetry, then there is and now another trend is not only I am talking about both Bengali and English, that the current issues, I mean, if there is an ecological problem, because environment problem is there, so there are eco poetries coming, and there is an anthology recently published on eco poetry. I think Sudeep is also coming up with some climate changes and some poetry on that. So those things are another issue based, and pandemic, of course, that is also one aspect which Dominic has mentioned, that has a really influence to everybody in our society. So people started, and the only thing is that poetry can give you certain I mean, you could call it solace, or it has given some healing effect. So this pandemic and how to overcome that healing part, that is also important, that can be expressed in poetry. So that is another issue. And again, there is another issue which we normally, because of we are very busy in our life. So the short poems, which Dominic has read one, Haiku, Haiban, these were there much earlier, but nowadays it has almost a craze, it is coming. I mean, there are so many, if you go through this social media, or in electronic media and online journal, there are hundreds of haiku, haiban, haiga. There are a lot of journals, and you must be knowing one Pune-based poet, Dr. Kaula Ramesh. She's a really exponent, and she is mentoring a lot of people how to write haiku, haiku write senru, haiku write haiga. So that is the positive part, definitely. But then that there are other thing, any three lines, and many people doesn't like also haiku, in the sense that they say that it doesn't mean anything. It cannot do any impact to anybody's life. So those things are there. I mean, but these are the trends. I mean, these haiku, I mean, these short poems are micro poems is one of the trend of the current scenario, and issue-based poem, that is also another scenario. And another thing is that, which I have observed, which Sudeep has already mentioned, that regarding the grammar of the poetry, and that is we have to accept, even though these our younger people, they may or may not accept many times, because they are more interested in publishing the poetry rather than we have refining the stuff which you are writing. And in our time, we used to go for certain file, like a workshop file. Whatever you suppose your poem is not accepted, you put it in your workshop file. You try to revise that and again write back again. So these type of mentoring by yourself, you can do it, which are not seen nowadays. I mean, people are just like that, because there is a lot of avenues are there. You just publish it on your own. And if you publish to certain journals where there is some editing or peer reviewing there, then of course you need a lot of modification and a lot of revisions. So this is another aspect. And these are the things which we have to bear in mind, that in India, we have some Indian poetry. It's a huge environment, where we have more than 300 years of history. We have 28 languages. We have so many dialects and languages are there, and their smell and texture, hues are totally different and totally diverse. So if you think of that Indian poetry in that way, and if you write in any particular language, in English or in Bengali or in Hindi, or in Tamil, Malayalam, whichever language you are writing, you are always in the opinion that yes, I can do something in my language, because I don't know the other part. I only depends on translation. So what I feel that Sahitya Academy is doing wonderful job, especially Indian literature. We have a lot of translated poems. So that is another way to be connected with the other poets of other language, which we don't know, because we are not knowing all the languages. So that is another very good. Initially, in earlier times, we don't have much translation, except for a very few. I mean, we used to read Buddhadev Bose, Baudelaire. I mean, those things are, they're very rare, but it was there. Also one of the very important part of our modern poetry, or not only in poetry, in prose also. So I think that is also another positive vibes for our time. And before I just, and another aspect is that the structure which Sudeep told, that it has to be, I mean, it has to be renewed and it has to be investigated, explored, because we are always very routine type of this pattern we used to write. So I just read one of the poem which I just recently read, of a very powerful poet of modern times. That I'll just read few lines, because the what is there, that not only the words, what, and this tight structure, which is liked by many other avenues of online journals now. The title of the poem is Fusion. Wending its way, his feelings hum, pursues in unknown languages. She enables translator, fixes these to suit their setting. The aphonic are blessed. I mean, the voiceless are blessed. They don't require the arrogance of words to express themselves. Nicety of nuance are at their bidding. This is written by Sanjeev Sethi, who is a very powerful poet of our time. So this type of structure, which we have not seen earlier, so it is a very interesting and encouraging thing for the poets, I think, in general, and there is no particular thing about it. And moreover, there are certain young poets who are writing as good as any senior poet. So that also, they also to be needs to be encouraged, and they are there always. So we have to see that positive part also. So I think this scenario which Sudeep says that it's a fabulous scenario. Only thing you need a lot of, corrections and a lot of polishing is required. So I do agree with that. In Indian English poetry, it has a very bright future, and it was there for, because now we have our own voice. We are not dependent on the Western influence and the style. We have our own. We are culture specific. We write in wherever we are, any part of India. We have that impact of that locality. So I think it's a vast, you have the scope of widely, even it's just like a big canvas. So I'm sure that this can be helping to improve our poetry, and current scenario, it will sustain for years.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's robust, but at the same time need some course corrections. We will come back to you on a couple of things on the shorter form of expression structure and other things. Now, before anything, we will go to Jaideep Sarangi. Jaideep Sarangi, what are your thoughts on current trends in Indian poetry?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, all co-panelists. And I'm really delighted to be here today. It's wonderful, and it's almost a feast of ideas. The kind of expression Sudeep has captured, that the true Indian English poetry didn't start before Nassim Ezekiel. In a sense, he rightly hinted at the idea of imitation and all that. But I will concentrate from 1970s onward. That is the independence of Indian English poetry, or I will say the confidence face of confidence of Indian English poetry. And in Meenakshi, I will start with Meenakshi Mukherjee's article, The Anxiety of Indianness. I think this anxiety of Indianness is over by the confident users of English in Indian English poetry. The idea of spirituous Lucky, the spirit of the place, the land and its people are always our baggage, because India is a country where multiculturalism and multilingualism are the two. One is heart, another is, of course, the soul, we'll say, if we don't distinguish art from soul. So land and its people are the baggage of Indian writers in English. I think in 2004, I had a discussion with C.T. Narasimha sometime, that he used to say there are only a few Indian English poets to be considered. And he had a high opinion of the big trios, that is Milk Rajanand, Raja Rao, and R.K. Narayan. And I asked him, why is that? Why do you think that Indian English drama and Indian English poetry did not develop or did not come up to the age when you compare it with the Indian English novels? He bluntly said, Jaideep, no one could write a poem that Raja Rao wrote a novel in Kanthapura. No one could come out with a poem of Indian Swadeshi Gharana, a Swadeshi revolution, say, a true spirit of freedom in a particular poem which you can national or which has international visibility. So Indian English poetry before independence, no one could handle that much, to an extent that the national resurgence has been captured. So that was a kind of hint he was making, that Kanthapura can be a Gandhian epic, and Kanthapura is mini Indian nationalist movement in a nutshell. So Indian English poetry lacked the tempo of Indian tempo, of Indian freedom struggle, for example, a big cause for country's freedom. Then similarly, a partition. There's hardly any good poems, visible poems on Indian English poem on partition, on both sides of the partition. I am talking about, there are so many beautiful short stories, so many novels in, I'd say, Bangla, Bengal partition, as well as Punjab partition part. So when novels took the ground of political history of India, nation building of India, that poetry did not match to that extent. Now, when I talk about the land and its people, it became a burden for the early Indian English poets. But in 1970 onwards, what we find the creative energy for poetry out of this burden. That burden turned into a responsibility. My journey is Jayanta Mahapatra's relationship to his random descent, or to land, or Summer in Kolkata of Kamala Das, to the introduction of Meena Kandaswamy's Touch, written by Kamala Das. So at the same time, Shakuntala in Skirt, what has been associated with Indian writing in English, Indian Gharana in English, to someone who wrote a title of a poetry book called Fast Language. Of course, I'm mentioning Professor Sangyukta Das Gupta. So now look at the confidence that the Indian English poets earned and gained over a period of 50 years or so. More light. It's a more lighted discourse. So the ethnic exotica that people were talking about in 50s and 60s, I think 70s saw the bold rise of very prominent Indian English poets, Kamala Das coming, Jayanta Mahapatra coming, and under the Orion, as we know, celebrating 50 years of K.K. Darwala. So 70s was the time of the backbone of solidification of Indian English poetry. And also Indian English poetry came out of its rustic look of the metro cities. For example, Mumbai to Cuttack, Tinkaniya Bagicha. And this shift was instrumental in decentralization of Indian English poetry. I am really thankful to Sudeep, who has categorically said the mentoring of Indian English poetry was badly needed, and which is what is missing after Jayanta Mahapatra. Because Mahapatra, if you talk to all leading poets of the Northeast region, like Rabina Sangam and many others, even for Meena Alexander, the diasporic poetess, and many were inspired, but none other than Jayanta Mahapatra. And look at his epic-like journal that Chandrabhaga, he was editing. And look at his man's contribution in ushering hopes for the budding poets. I think there lies the success story of Indian English poetry when you build up the poets for the next generation. Suppose if a captain is a good captain who builds up the next generation of players for India. That's why possibly we associate great captaincy to Saurav Gangopadhyay, and Saurav Ganguly could create a visionary team for tomorrow's Indian cricket. So a very important Indian English poetry in the 70s and early part of 80s. And early part of 80s is, I will say, is iconic celebration of Indian English poetry. And another few things that determined Indian English poetry and gave impetus for its worldwide visibility is the late 1970s travels by the Indian English poets to abroad. And they traveled with a baggage of Indian writing in English, as well as Indian myths, Indian traditions, Indian ways of life. And they participated in different literary festivals, and they gave talks at different places, and they met up with different personalities poets of different countries, critics of different countries, and mid-1970s onwards, there is a growth of Indian scholarship on Indian English poetry. I fall back on Sid Harris, one of the prominent names of Indian English poetry, and then John Oliver Parry and Cox. Then so many, those people, they took up Indian English poetry as their perspectives of research and promotion. And many scholarly articles, books came out in 80s and early 90s. Contemporary Indian English poems are armed with the cultural uniqueness. The cultural uniqueness that actually Malasamy has hinted at, K.V. Dominic has hinted at, and also Sudeep has summed it very important way. And Gopal has hinted at from his examples from the East. And that's in a kind of enigma, because India remains a model for another Indian. Suppose I am coming from Bengal. If I visit to Manipur, the culture is not a divorce between the Manipuris and the Bengalis, but it is a kind of bridge between one part of the country to other part of the country, one heart of country to another heart of country. So it's a message, it's a kind of bridge between two important hearts of India. Now, it's about love, greed, fortitude, nostalgia, hope. So all encapsulated in one particular format called Indian English poetry. Now, clay, wax, wood, bronze, stone, harmonium, materials, the Indian artists laid their hands on their consummate artistry in brilliance and, of course, in confident cadence. English is now the language of the market, production and the produced. We cannot deny the fact that English language is a powerful tool of cultural control as it works through a system of cultural values and nuances. In his last part of his talk, Gopal has rightly mentioned the translation of different Indian vernaculars into English, because unless it is translated into the global tongue, it will not reach out to the world audience. And had there been good translations of many Indian vernacular translations, vernacular writers' translations available in English in last 50 years or so, we could have earned more Nobel Prizes for Indian vernaculars. Sunil Ganguly,
okay, your 4 minutes left.
Yeah, we further relate the production to identity management and power distribution within a bilingual map and beyond. The poets prepare us for art creating imaginary gardens with the help of images and symbols drawn from strict and antecedents, as well as myths and legends. And I will just point out some of the very important experiences that the poets undertake, Indian English poets undertake: the cultural experience, the myth making of the land and its people, and of course, the new idiom that they create. They contextualize their writings in the cultural milieu of India. And I will just talk about one more point about Indian English poetry. Most of the Indian English contemporary poets are influenced by the social and political tradition of Pablo Neruda, Nicanor Parrar, and Roberto Bolaño, and other leading Latin American poets like Parrar and other Latin American counterparts. Contemporary Indian English poetry is sharp, intelligent, and also they write in simple languages. Another brief hint to the development of mind style. When you have confident in using language, you can play with your mind. I will refer to one poet who will simply move you and who will take you to another dimension called, I think the poet we all know, Vibhu Padhi. I'll read out only a few lines from Vibhu Padhi's Story of a Night. Blue, transparent, her body flowing inside her like seawater. I walked nearer, quietly sat beside her. She was looking into me as if I couldn't be anyone but herself. Quietly, I curled my arm around her throughout, imagining the many ways to hold an absence. Fear was no near. Vibhupati is possibly one poet who writes about the mind of a people, the mind of absences, the minds of arrivals, departures, body spaces, and he is a confident user of Indian English, who can use Indian English effectively to fathom deep into the unfathomable depth of mind. I will end my discussion at this period, at this point of time, with reading two lines from his another poem called Stories. They appear on the landscapes, in between trees and bird cries. In this town, every few know about Ganges waters or Himalayas steadily declining snow. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Very
very
good.
much. Yeah, Sanjukta Das Gupta has been listening to the silent gods. Okay, before going to Sanjukta Das Gupta, I will briefly come to Sudeep Sen, Malasobi Jacob, Gopal Lucky, and Jaideep Sarangi. And you must have seen in the comments, Sudeep Sen himself has put 3 comments. So we will take that up before going to Sanjukta Das Gupta, and after that, if we have time, you can discuss among yourself. And the first observation plus question is to Sudeep Sen. Whatever that your observation or your characterization of the Indian poetry, that is to great extent, is it not applicable to Indian prose also? Indian prose writing, it was also imitative, then it emerged into something else. Or for that matter, many Indian language literature, many languages, Bhasha literature has more or less followed the same pattern. That is one. Second is you talked about the toxicity and the need to develop another dimension of perspective. When we I'm not saying, okay, lot of plenty of young poets, you yourself associated with somebody, like I just give 5-6 names, our Mas Bin Lal, Meda Singh, Madhu Raghavendra, Sohini Basak, Akil Katyal. These are the people who in your anthology somewhere they also feature. Or for that matter, somebody like Meena Swamy. When I feel that these young poets are also taking them on. Now, Sudeep Sen, 2 minutes. Please unmute yourself.
Just wanted to know what you meant by taking them on.
No, they are also trying their level best to just taking down the toxicity. I'm not saying on means, toxicity.
Well, it's best left that's a discussion best left out of this forum, because it's very controversial and it's very personality based. I really have very little interest in that, frankly. I can talk about their poetry. All the names you mentioned, right?
Poets. You have more. You know more people.
Yes, all the names you mentioned are very good poets. Some of them are not in the Sahitya Academy book because they chose to withdraw for some strange, mysterious reason. But that's a personal call. But you're talking about fiction versus poetry. With poetry, things are much more difficult because the form demands a kind of discipline, which I'm not saying fiction doesn't, but fiction is easier to write, which is why in schools and colleges, so little work is done in Indian poetry or poetry in general. Look at the courses, apart from, if you take out the last 5 or 6 years, when I was studying at Delhi University, the most modern poet we studied was T.S. Eliot. For God's sake. There were like 2-3 generations of poets I've read after that, and in college I'm still stuck at Eliot. It hasn't changed that much either, because even if poetry is taught, it's taught as subsidiary papers, as allied papers in the mainstream papers. Again, we are stuck with Mahapatra and Daruwalas and one poem, one iconic poem. killing of the scorpion. I mean, my ears die when I hear it again. You know, it's not a bad poem.
Yeah.
There's a wealth of other things. Why is that happening? Many of my friends are academics. Many of them are here. They confess in private that they're lazy because it's harder to teach poetry. Poetry is so badly taught in universities and schools that, you know, it's left at the end of the semester. Quickly they'll go over it, and then that's that. You know, you cannot teach poetry by saying such and such, the story of the poem is this and the character of the poem is this. You have to feel the poem. And the reason I'm saying all this is I feel very blessed and privileged because I grew up in a family where poetry was read aloud. We learned poems by heart, Bangla certainly. You know, Qazi Nazrul Islam's Bolobir, or Jivanando Das's, you know, Bonolata Sen, Chultar, Kobekar, Ondokar, Bidishar, Nisha. These are things, you know, we've learned by heart, which is very important because you get the cadence of the language. And not only that, you inherit it and own it, even though it's someone else's work, if the work is strong. In school, how was Shakespeare taught in school? I remember the first acts of so many Shakespearean plays purely because the brothers in St. Columba's School in Delhi, the brothers would fly into the class. And of course, boys' school, we're all eating our tiffins and doing everything else but studying. They would fly into the class. And I remember Richard II, old John of Gaunt, time-honored Lancaster, has thou according to... So, you know, poetry demands a different kind of thing. It happens in some languages, I know, because many friends of mine who are Telugu poets or Malayali poets or Bengali poets, they recite with a kind of thunderous velocity that is infectious, which is, you know, you learn the poems by heart. Fiction, it doesn't work like that. And it's the other part of your question.
Excellent. You put it out very excellently.
And the other thing is, of course, it's market driven. Publishers for some strange reason have decided that poetry doesn't sell. It's not true at all. It is absolutely not true. But
Sudeep, now we will take up your comment. That is to Swamy Jacob. This you must have read. What the comment is, Northeast and mainland classification by who? You mentioned, so you have a classification, and I would like to add to that comment one question. What about very young poets? Some of them recently we saw from Manipur and all, they are 16, 17, 18 girls and boys are excellent. These 2 points, Swamy Jacob, one by Sudeep Sen or another by me. So please unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. Could you just repeat the question?
Sudeep Sen has.
I can ask the question.
Please.
So, you know, in your talk, you mentioned Northeast versus mainland. So I was wondering who classifies this way. Are they the Northeasterners saying so? Are the mainlanders saying so? And if they are saying so, don't you think it's a problematic thing because it not only creates divisiveness, why not Indian? Why not national? You know, I'm sitting in Delhi, I read all the poets without thinking of where they come from at all. I read the biographies right at the end. To me, the poetry is most important. So when you get this kind of schism, there is a problem and there's a political act which is kind of dangerous. So I'm just wondering about your...
Thanks Sudeep. Swamy.
Yes. So when we say that mainland, I would usually mean it in quotes because there is so much of, I don't know who says it, but the Northeast people in general very often feel culturally alienated, like they are kind of not quite counted as part of Indians, and maybe because of our different looks, they are not. They feel unaccepted in certain situations. So that is why I said there is a feeling of alienation very often, being misunderstood, being thought of as foreigners, and that kind of thing, and which is why things like literature is so important, like in the literary field, in the field of poetry and all. We are all
Okay.
one.
Okay, you say that it is by Northeast. No,
Yeah.
it is by the locals. This classification is by the locals. That is why there is a particular theme of a poetry.
Sometimes by the locals, but the
Yeah.
other way around also is, a fact in certain situations when they treat you like a foreigner, that feeling comes. Yeah.
Who's
Which
the
is
they?
why poetry is such a good link.
Yes, Sudeep, I understand. That is why she says that she mentioned there is one of the themes is alienation. That is what she is. Okay. Now we will leave it at that. We will go to Gopal Lucky. Gopal Lucky, you mentioned about performance, poetry, etc., etc. Very well put. But when it comes to you that the shortest form of expression, I just would like to add there, India is a land, like some of the things, Indianism that Sudeep is referring to, the India's land of a shortest form, one of the best form of shortest form of expression. You go down south, you have Tirukural, just as, I don't know how many syllables. Then you have Dohas, you have Sutras, any language you take. And I feel that, I feel that Indians will also, I'm sure Sudeep and others will agree, that Indians also will master this art when it comes to English language also. Your thoughts?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the Indian will definitely master this thing because nowadays it's always, I mean, people are trying to express everything in a much shorter form, in the sense that that emotional outpouring is now much more controlled. People are now expressing in a much more cold and much more dispassionate way. So I think definitely it will be maybe in the next 10-15 years, it will be it will be more popular, that shorter form will be there. So I agree with you, what you're telling.
Yeah, thank you. The last one is to Jaideep Sarangi. And well, I want to add here to what Sudeep Sen said. Sudeep Sen is very correctly points out there is plenty of good poetry about partitions. Look at the progressive writers movement, for example, Faiz, Mir, Azmi. I also would like to point out before pre-independence, Indian English writing, many people tend to exclude Sri Aurobindo. Is some of the finest poetry, some prose writing. If you take Life Divine and all, finest English writing you can find in Sri Aurobindo.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to connect all these things, and we will finally go to Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, Madam.
Oh, thank you. But wasn't Joydeep supposed to say something first?
Yeah, Jaideep. Yeah, please go ahead. Jaideep, you have anything to add there?
Yeah, just it's a wonderful point. But actually, if you look at the prominence of partition novels and in English, or you say about freedom struggle, that kind of prominence is not visible in Indian English poetry in that connection or recurrence. So there's so many frequency of writings as well. You will have to think about the bulk of literature that is being produced. But it's a wonderful journey. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Professor Sanjukta.
Thank you. Very exhilarating session. And I don't know how I have become Parda Nashin. That was not my intention, but I will definitely try to break the silence at least.
Yeah, please.
And I'm very impressed by all the presentations, and all of you spoke very differently about the current trends of Indian poetry specifically, and also Indian English poetry much more specifically. But the poems that most of you used were absolutely Indian English poetry, but you didn't go in for translations either. Now, I think the first thing we should think about, what is the target or intention of a poet? A poet is a philosopher for me, and a poet is a visionary. A poet is a pathfinder. And as we know, in these troubled times, unprecedented times, the poet has been able to manifest a sense of resilience despite it all. And that has become obvious from the poetry that has been written in the last 5 or 6 or 7 months. All of you may have read Sudeep's poem on the corona, and which was also recognized internationally. And I think a lot of poetry has been written at around this time, where there has not always been any sense of despair. As the poem that Dominic read was not about despair and or as if we have reached the end of the world, but a sense of resilience, a sense of ability to look beyond to certain positives rather than thinking that everything is a wasteland. But again, as a teacher of English, Sudeep's concern about the use of language is something that all of us, most of us are teachers of English here, and those of us who are not also, but are competently handling the language with a certain amount of skill, we understand that the poetry that we seem to see from the very young enthusiasts of poetry sometimes probably do not cater to our understanding of the language. However, will we let the Oxford English Dictionary dominate us? Or would we think that, okay, let us take those terms that was used by Rushdie when he mixed up a lot of Indian terms and languages and also songs from Hindi films and sort of talked about chatnification of the language. However, chatnification of the language is not to say that it should be in full defiance of grammar, in full defiance of the use of nouns and adverbs and pronouns. And that is a dismal demonstration of the very poor language sometimes that we notice. And one reason for that is that those who are writing poetry are not reading poetry. The word mentoring that has been used so many times by all the established poets who are internationally recognized, who have so many books, and they have talked about mentoring. There is a lot of impatience nowadays, it seems, about adhering to a notion that you have to learn before you have the confidence to express. That learning or rewas, whether it is dancing, whether it is singing, whether it is writing poetry, or even writing an essay for an examination, you have to practice. And unless you practice, you feel that, well, the first poem, Born on the Page, is the poem that I need to publish. If you remember, Jaideep, when we had that session with Nisim Ezekiel's daughter, Kavita Ezekiel, she said that Nizim Ezekiel had advised her that you need to revise a poem at least 7 times before you can even think of publishing it. But I do not think nowadays those who write would even spend 7 seconds to even revise what it all was.
That's another school of thought, isn't it?
Yes. And therefore, as Sudeep said, that those poems become popular within a very, very small community of poets who are constantly congratulating each other. And I never knew the word like and dislike to be so very part of one's vocabulary so overwhelmingly. And because like was something that you just disliked if somebody liked something of yours. Yes, you had to be a little more expressive, use a much better word, say it was so impressive. But now it's like saying nice. I hate the word nice because it has such an icy feeling. Nice, ice. Yes. So, those who are writing English need to also listen to the use of the language, the rhythm of the language, the force of the language, the music of the language. If you just use English words, You cannot write poetry, but as Sudeep said, you can write prose. But prose up to, again, a different level. Supposing you want to write like James Joyce, you have to have that sense of language, that interior rhythm of the language. And therefore, like even why am I going to the old poets? Think of the poet who recently got the Nobel Prize for poetry, Louise Glick. Glick is how her surname is pronounced. I picked it up from Google. So Glick's poems, you feel that when you read it, you think that, oh, it's so interiorized, it's so confessional, and the language is absolutely the spoken rhythm. It reminds you of, though there is a notion that she reminds you more about Emily Dickinson, who is a late 19th century American poet, but she also reminds you about Robert Frost. And so, but then the way she's handling the language is the language of common speech up to a point. And then the aesthetics of the language, which makes it into poetry, which excites it into poetry, which makes it into that sensitive, fine expression where poetry finds a zone of its own away from prose, is what Glick's poetry does. I would, of late, you would say that how do you even dare to talk about Glick when most of us haven't even read her? This is my life. I have been given...
I have read her poems. Yeah, no problem.
So, no, I've been given a task to make a presentation after 10 days. So now I've given my nights and days to reading Glick. And the poem that I really liked is the poem October. It's a poem in 6 parts, and the use of the language is absolutely brilliant. Now, this consciousness of the use of language is very important. And so whether it is in English or Bangla or Malayalam, whatever language we are using, poetry has its own very, very specific use of the language. The language of Bob Dylan, who also got a prize, The Answer, My Friend, is Blowing in the Wind, or The Masters of War, is a very vibrant language of aggression and assertiveness. 4 years later comes Louis Glick. And here the language is much more nuanced. And therefore, I feel in the current trends that Indian English poetry should assume would be a sort of a language that we will present to the world as even better than what is mainland English.
Yeah, Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta,
Yeah.
I mean, if Mala Swamy, you want to go, it's well past your dinner time. It must be 9:30, 10 in the evening. Please.
I'm
leave.
fine. Thank you.
No, but I think that's all. I think this is awful on my part to keep on talking.
No. We will leave Mala Swamy. We will leave Mala Swamy so that she can go. She has to go to bed. So.
I don't want to go.
Oh, she doesn't want to go, Mala. Why should you? Don't go. Anyway, I'll stop here, and you can come up, Rajmohan. We've been going on for a very long time.
We are waiting.
Thank you, Sanjukta.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Sudeep.
Yeah, I said thank you, Sanjukta, and all of you. We've had these discussions.
Yeah. So I would like to thank Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, Sudeep Sen, Mala Swamy Jacob, Professor Dominic, Gopal Lucky, and our partner Jaydeep Sarangi. So thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Happy puja to you.
Yeah, happy puja. Thank you.
Happy puja greetings to everybody.
Yeah, and all those who are watching this program, please continue to watch Sahitya Academy's programs in all 24 languages. All of them are going live now. Thank you.
Thank you.